All right, this is a public service webinar from 24 Hour Nation presented today by Zoom. It will be made available on the 24 Hour Nation YouTube channel in perpetuity for those of you who are watching. We're appreciative of the fact that you're here. Thank you for joining us. There are four goals today. One is to firmly plant a discussion into the brains of people who work in the nighttime sector, bar owners, music venues, clubs, festival operators, those in work in the creative industries. And that message, we hope, is about fentanyl and opioid and drug overdoses. Second goal is to introduce our guests to you that have dialed in and are watching and listening from around the world. I've got folks from Estonia and the UK and Switzerland and all over the place watching, and we're glad that you're with us. Third is to kind of explore what's possible in terms of a collective industry response, nighttime industry response to the opioid issues in our country, what's working, what's bullshit, what business owners might want to take in consideration if they want to help save lives. And then I'd like to do that. Finally, my final goal is to triangulate this discussion in a way that falls somewhere in between judgment and moralization and sensationalism and our own resistance to the topic that comes out of unfamiliarity or discomfort. I want to make some introductions. First of all, Tatiana Paulino, which I'm very sad to say has come down with a bad case of the flu and is not with us, but being able to tell her story and how the ASAP Foundation was formed is Darryl Phillips. Darryl works in the urban music and video and film sectors. He's been a director and a producer of documentaries on social justice and activism. He is a friend of Stephen Rodriguez, ASP Yams, the inspiration behind the Always Strive and Prosper Foundation, founded by his mom, Tatiana, and Darryl also serves as the executive director of that foundation. Among its strategies, the foundation gets fentanyl testing kits in bars in New York State and other things. We'll hear about that here in a bit. Nathan Smiddy, known as Narcan Nate. He's kind of, I was telling Ripley earlier, Nathan's kind of like the Johnny Appleseed of the West Coast when it comes to distributing Narcan and telling people about his own story. He overdosed at the age of 19. He's taken that whole life experience and bundled it into this zealous missionary work to get Narcan in front of people and to train people on how to use Narcan. And it's interesting, Nate, I've had a couple of people say Narcan. Now, what is that? Oh, wow. And so we have some work to do. And then Ripley Soprano, Ripley, who I've enjoyed talking with a little bit here. Ripley's the publisher of Dirty Magazine, NYC's horniest fashion magazine, and it is horny. And she's a collaborator and an affiliate with the streetwear brand Brujas. Ripley is also an advocate for health autonomy, which Ripley will tell us about here in a little bit. And Ripley also has some very keen insights about how to target messaging involving drug use for those who are in the club and party scene in a way that I think the whole Nancy Reagan just say no mindset is not being very effective. So those are our guests. 24 Hour Nation is a news and information project for nighttime advocates and adventurers. We produce and manage a website, social media, podcasts, webinars. You can visit us online at 24hournation.com or on social media at 24 Hour Nation. My name is Randall White. This is what I do. So from a panel perspective, first we'll take time with each of you, and I want to hear about your experience, your story, what you bring to the topic of harm reduction, risk reduction, and recreational drug use, and then also what message you would like to get in front of nighttime stakeholders, business owners, nighttime district managers, anybody who shapes and molds our cities at night, because there's a gap here and an opportunity here. I may ask clarifying questions as we go along through each of you. Then I'll have some questions to ask collectively of the panel to hear your thoughts on some topics. Finally, those of you who are following along with us, you can pop your questions into the chat or into the Q&A. and I'll triage some of those towards the end of our hour together and put those in play as we before we close up. Tatiana's story is astounding. Earlier, Darryl, I shared that fantastic photograph of her as a young woman with young ASAP yams on her chest as a toddler. It's a delightful photograph and one that resonates with parents everywhere. But Darryl, tell us a little bit about Tatiana's story, how you got involved, your work, and the resources of the ASP Foundation, and bring us up to speed. One last thing, I want to thank Albie Bocanegra for introducing you and me. Albie is on this call, and he made this connection. So Darryl Phillips, thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you, Randall, and thank everyone for being here. Just to, I guess, rewind a little bit, Tatiana, I guess we all just give a big up to her. Hopefully she heals up. I think she's got the flu. Yeah, she's a mom and still a mom, after losing her son, ASAP Yams, Steven Rodriguez. I think her dedication overall to him during her life, she raised him as the only child. In his passing, he passed about 7 years ago. And it was kind of like she lost a huge chunk of her world. Going through that process, and that was from he passed from an acute mixed opiate overdose. And then from that, there was a mourning process, a mourning period. Someone suggested that we should meet and talk, and it was a mutual friend of mine and Steven's. And they expressed, Darryl's, has been around him. He's a little bit older, and, maybe he can give you some insight, or just you guys can talk. So from that, it was just kind of doing dinners at our house in this mourning period. I myself was going through that process as well. She expressed, and this is something that just is telling her personality, she expressed that she just wanted to figure out how she could get involved to be able to help one other parent or one other pair of parents not be able to go through what she's going through. And that started off just in ideating, talking, and then really doing gatherings in her community room in her building, and just trying to find some semblance of what I think some people in the room saw as a mutual issues or problems, and discussions in their own families, or what they saw out throughout the city. From that, we had a couple of things where we actually saw that, we, couldn't really focus on abstinence, but wanted to focus on some kind of messaging that if Steven was alive would kind of be able to, impact him, or something that would resonate with him. And so from there, we, started to look at other organizations and other people. And one of them was Dr. Carl Hart. And we had a great meeting with him. And, that was a very telling meeting because, we were in there, he has a couple of colleagues, and, when we're talking, I said something crazy like, oh, I'm not a person that's never not done drugs before or something. So, he just put the brakes on and was just like, hey, why don't you just say you do drugs? And, that's just an easy place to start and just get, he's like, if you don't know about drugs, then you really shouldn't be, be involved in this, shouldn't be a part of it. It helps you be more of an experienced messenger, or an experienced support. So that just kind of opened up a whole new door as far as, stigmatization in my mind, also just as far as being forward and being able to have real conversations with people. So, reading his books, and then also being able to audit part of his class at different times at Columbia was very helpful in just guiding, and really saw a lot of what we see overall in this field of harm reduction, and what we see overall in aspects of discussing drug use or substance use and substance abuse, is just really has to go back to law enforcement, and also has to go back to stigmatization of people. And so, we just kind of incorporated that, followed the Washington Heights Corner Project. They were very helpful. NYRE, New York Harm Reduction Educators, Vocal, and local organizations did not see to copy, but see where we could help participate, retranslate some of their messaging that we thought could be, more useful in a demographic between 15 and 35, which we kind of felt were people that resonated with this history of yams. and the legacy that he had. And, you know, so just trying to be impactful in that area, in those ways. Along the lines, we've done, you know, I guess yearly events that deal with not crisis per se, but we do a Mother's Day event for mothers that are dealing with substance abuse in their homes or themselves or loved ones or have lost a loved one. Do a back to school event, and we do a toy and coat drive for holidays. So those kind of are consistent things that we kind of base in the community. And then overall, we started giving out some of the fentanyl test kits that we're getting from, you know, Nairi, other places, and, you know, I was trying to get them in places and thought, okay, maybe we should get a box, and like something that aesthetically is not disrupting an environment or a venue, but, you know, it's just kind of there, almost like a fish tank of condoms that you might see in a bar back in the day. And just kind of tried to introduce it in a few spots. And there's somebody I know, one of the participants that's on here, attendees, is Azamat Doshan, and he had his store in New York, 375 showroom. You know, and I proposed it to him, and he was like, "This is great. I need this." You know, and that was the first location that really accepted the box. And then the next one was a bar called Boys Don't Cry on Orchard Street. So we just kind of built from there. And the idea was to be able to say, hey, we need to be able to make these things accessible and available in whatever way. Giving them out one by one was much more difficult. And, you know, it just became, you know, kind of a mission to just get another brick, you know, like another spot. We thought that ubiquity would help, like in the area of the Lower East Side, you know, which is kind of like a cultural mixing spot in New York right now. And also we had friends that had bars and restaurants, and we saw that being in bars and restaurants would be helpful as far as nightlife. When are people engaging in, you know, maybe using substances or getting substances for later to take home, also that are available and open on the hours when some people are probably mostly using substances. So that, you know, that was just the process, and that's been kind of like a summary overall.
Well, thanks, Darryl. And there was a comment I read, a quote of Tatiana's in one particular story where she said basically that, you know, her son just wanted to get high. He didn't want to die. And that the issue that I don't think a lot of people in my peers are necessarily kind of being mindful of is that we have these drugs that are getting cut with fentanyl. And that, and probably Nate, you can talk to that a little bit more too, that fentanyl is this really kind of unstable, unpredictable product. It's cheap to make, it's shipped in, it gets a lot of alarm, a lot of political points scored by, oh, we stopped more fentanyl, see this bag of colorful fentanyl pills. But in fact, it's a very unreliable drug that's getting mixed with recreational drugs, and kids are, you know, they're at event. The times have changed. Times have changed from the late 70s when I was the club kid, Ripley. And when we just kind of took, when we kind of took whatever somebody handed us and didn't kind of worry about it. But these days, that's not the case, because somebody has probably is making a profit off of cutting that with fentanyl or some other thing that produces this kind of overdose reaction. Nathan, I want to hear your story a little bit. I know you're having a harder time hearing us, but we're hearing you extraordinarily well. Tell us about your story, what you're doing, how come you wound up doing what you're doing as this kind of missionary, this for Narcan or naloxone spray, and what it does. Talk to us, Nate.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, so I mean, essentially I started using drugs at, I don't know, 15, 16, and then it escalated at 18. I was also selling drugs too, so I got involved in that. You know, it was profitable, you know, and I lived in a small town, there weren't a lot of jobs, so I seen selling drugs as a way to make income, you know. And then at that point I didn't really use a lot. Like I wouldn't, because I was driving around all day serving people, you know, and so I was like, this is not conducive to, you know, me making a profit. And it was, you know, it's obviously dangerous. And then one night I did half of a Roxy 30 or a blue, you know, the M30s, the real M30s. And I was like, wow, like I want to feel like this for the you know, every day of my life. And it just kind of took off, you know. And I never had any issues with substance use before then, you know. It was just recreation. I was doing like what every teenager did, you know. I was experimenting, partying, having fun, you know, whatever. And then that changed it. And so I started using, and I became a poly substance user, which is where you're using multiple drugs, you know. And then it was around when Opanas came out. I'd never done them. Opanas are extended release, meaning it hits you over time, and the Roxys were instant release, you know. And so I had never done them. I was low on my Roxys, right? And so I popped an Opana with the Roxys I took, and I didn't feel anything. I was like, wow, why is this not hitting? And then I just took a handful of them, and the next thing you know, I'm at home and stuff like that, and I just collapsed, and and my family, like, they really didn't know about my substance use, and that's why I hit real big on like having these real open conversations about substance use and like how we have to have these conversations and stop demonizing drug users and drugs in general, you know. And so after that, I overdosed one more time in 2018, and before that, I seen this guy. He was I was in like a recovery home, right? And he was affiliated with a gang. He had just got out of prison, right? And we're all getting high. And so I'm thinking, okay, this is my mindset. And a lot of people don't understand this, but you know, if you're in the streets and you're whatever, you're living like this, like there's a different set of rules, right? And so I'm thinking, if I call 911, like I might save this guy's life, but he might go back to prison, right? And so I'm thinking that might make me a snitch, and I don't want to be a snitch. So I'm like, I don't want him to die, but I don't want him to live and have to go back to prison either. And that's kind of like the predicament that I was in. Now, there was no naloxone in this house, and the 911 operator didn't even tell me what to do, because I'd always been the guy overdosing. I'd never been the guy come across someone overdosing, right? And so essentially I took that experience, and then in 2019, I found a company that I work for now called A New Path, and they've been distributing naloxone since 2014, I think, in California. And I just asked them to get involved, and then it just gradually grew and grew and grew, you know. And then my friend Brendan O'Connell started showing me how to use social media, because I never even talked about this on social media until like last August. And you know, I didn't really put it out there. I just did the work, you know, and that was that. And then it kind of just grew and grew, and I started talking about, like, you know, my drug use and why why like we have to change this whole like complete abstinence, like look at things, like how that's not always ideal, and how like we don't need to look at the drug. It's not the drug, it's the person's relationship with drugs. And at the end of the day, like, we are all drug users, you know what I mean? Like, people think that to be a quote unquote druggie, you know, you're using like meth or heroin, you know what I mean? But if you drink caffeine, if you smoke cigarettes, if you take Benadryl, you're a drug user. Like, we're all drug users. And like the DEA and like to just say no, they like vilify drug users, you know what I mean? And it's complete bullshit, and it keeps people from talking about their drug use, right? And it kills people, you know. And I kind of just, I don't know, just gained momentum and speed. And I was like, I'm just going to keep talking about this. Had no idea what I was doing. And people wanted to hear that. Like, they just wanted someone to talk about real, honest, raw conversation about drug use. You know what I mean? And the stigma has been killing people. And right now there's so much misinformation out there. Like, if I had the money, I would pay someone to combat misinformation online, because it's horrible, because fear spreads faster than the truth, you know? And you know, it's yeah. And I just, you know, people don't die because of drug use. People die because of policy failures. And in this country, they want to make this political, and there's nothing political about it. It's just about doing the right thing, you know what I mean? Which we've yet to do. We keep wanting to punish drug users and criminalize them, and it's never done anything good, you know?
Right. And so a day in your life, Nate.
A day.
Yeah. So you get up, and I saw recent footage. I think one of the television stations in San Diego, I think, did a story on you, and they came out and saw you you popped up at a parking with a group of people. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So a day in my life, I mean, I get up. If I'm doing showers that day, I get up, I go get the coffee for showers.
And by that you mean there's an organization that provides showers for people who need showers, right? It's like a homeless.
Yeah, it's called Humanity Showers. Yeah.
Okay.
So I help them out. You know, I do what I can for them too, just, you know, because I'm going to be there. So I lend my hand to them. So I get up, I go get the coffee from a place called OKC. They donate coffee and food to us. I go get the creamer and the cups from Winco. I pull up, unload. I get my bags. I have my black bag is my medical bag, so it's got wound care supplies, band-aids, bandages. I mean, I got a staple gun in there, you know, whatever. I mean, some cat just got shot in the elbow the other day, you know what I mean? People get stabbed, you know what I mean? It's just how how it is, and then I got my harm reduction bag, which is my blue bag. I mean, there's tourniquets, there's points, there's clean pipes, there's I mean, pretty much anything you need to be able to use drugs safely. I mean, you can think of it, it's in there. There's hygiene products, condoms, you know what I mean? And a lot of showers gives out a lot of hygiene products too. So it just depends. And so I usually have pre-made kits in there depending on like what people use, for each use or whatever. So points, clean smoking kits and so on, clean snorting kits. And I have that. And then I set up my table. And then, people know what's up. They just come ask me for a pack or the works, you know what I mean? So I do that for 3 or 4 hours in the morning. Then I go and drop the stuff off. And then depending on the rest of the day, sometimes I'll have a Zoom call. Sometimes I have to go to San Diego. Tonight I'm going to San Diego. We're going to test the drugs with the infrared spectrometer for people, and then I'll get on social media and I'll talk about something that I seen on the news that's bullshit, you know what I mean, or whatever. Talk about like what's going on, and then sometimes, usually at night, usually Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, I go to LA and do a concert or something like that. Just depends on what it is. It varies day to day, man. But it's really just like around all this. Like Friday, I'm going to LA to help this nonprofit. I'm going to look over their Narcan distribution program application to make sure they're hitting all the points they need to apply and be successful to get access to Narcan so they can distribute it on the streets of LA. And then I'm doing a concert there Saturday night in LA. And so I'll have Narcan test strips, whatever, the measuring scoops, the pipettes, the measure of water, the whole deal.
That's very cool. And Ripley, I'm going to come to you next. We were talking before the others joined us a little bit about why there isn't this consolidated effort from the industry, from the nightlife industry, in addressing the issues around Narcan and fentanyl and opioids, because unlike drunk driving and driving while impaired, there aren't distillers and breweries and wineries who are pumping $1 bazillion at this in order to get the message about don't drink and drive. So it really is up to the Hughes, Ripley, and the Darryls and the ASAP foundations and Nate's to get a message out. But I want your perspective in particular was very intriguing to me, because I read a quote of yours talking about, you're not having it with somebody coming in and saying, oh, here's what you should do. Here's the message. You should just stop using drugs. And that's not working. And so tell me a little bit from your perspective, Rip, about getting the message that needs to be gotten out to the people so that they just don't die.
Totally. Good question. Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's, the harm reduction movement has always been like super multifaceted. It has roots in AIDS activism. I always start by saying harm reduction is like, it's horror magic, like it's something that was started by the freaks and the perverts and people who sell sex and people who buy sex and people who trade sex for drugs and people who are living with disease. And the prevention part was about trying to take care of the people who are around you, like you're already living with this, but like, I want to try to minimize, the spread of disease. So I'm going to figure out the most effective way to do that. And it was not coming from a scientist or someone working in a clinic or whatever. Like that was developed later as a institutional support or co-optation, depending on who, your perspective on it of these ideas. But like ultimately, everything that we know about harm reduction like began on the margins. And so, I saw a question from someone that was, how do we bring public policy and local authorities along for the harm reduction ride? I mean, in a lot of ways, and I can be very cynical, like a lot of ways, the institutionalization has killed some of the parts of harm reduction and public health organizing that make it so unique, which is it should be about expanding people's definition of joy so that if they do decide to, that they do want to stop using or decide that they want to change their relationship to drugs in any way, that there are other options. And that's like where, when I use the term health autonomy, I think it's like really, it's like such a structural problem. You can't just look at like individual drug use. And so telling someone that they can just like should stop using is so short-sighted. Not to mention like health, you know, public health organizing should be about self-determination. This is something that Nate and I have talked about at length when I interviewed him for Dirty's last issue. And yeah, and with that, in terms of the sort of like sloganism and ways to try to like culturally communicate some of these ideas, that's like really why I started Dirty as it exists. You know, like it is about reconnecting that history of you know, the harm reduction movement and the AIDS activism movement was like an arts movement, and it's one that had so many incredible like visuals and sloganism that like brought people to the table. You know, like if I die of AIDS, drop my body on the steps of the FDA. Like there's so many there's so much like historical references that we can be drawing on that I think are much more effective than like a, you know, a government sponsored PSA. And that's why like I think what Nate is doing that's so grassroots, and what ASAP Foundation is doing that is like super connected to young people who are actually affected by these issues, who honestly, like a lot of nightlife, like, I mean, my biggest challenge to people who are in this webinar is like, what are you like, are you cooperating with like police departments to close down rap shows? Like, are you, you know, like, what are you doing to like really make sure that young people who are affected by these issues have a place to go, and are not having these spaces foreclosed on them? So that is like my biggest sort of like interest in this conversation is like, yes, it's about fentanyl. It's also that like fentanyl allowed us to talk about it in a more direct way, because like who's being affected by it has broadened. Right now we're like hearing about famous people being affected by this, and wealthier people being affected by this. But when it was purely marginalized communities, this wasn't something that people were as concerned about. And that's why I think it's important to support what's happening on the grassroots, you know, like hire young people who do use drugs to try to like figure out the best way to address these issues. Because I mean, and I talked to Nate about this too, it's just like people are pouring millions of dollars into studies that like a street using person could probably tell you right away.
Yeah.
So
yeah, let me save you that. Let me save you that $1 million grant and just lay it to you right here.
Right.
So I'm very intrigued by your point though about cultural communication, and I'd like to hear more about that from Darryl too. As the ASAP Foundation is talking with kids, cultural communication, what role is that having in your work? I mean, I've seen some of the things you all are doing in the annual Yams Day and stuff like that, and you're bringing together a community of people that communicate in a certain way, and you're communicating a message in a way that isn't about this kind of, you're not selling a can of soda pop, right?
Yeah, I mean, which is a drug in itself, you know, soda pop.
Right. Oh yeah, well there is that.
I think, and the cultural communication is to first just kind of like tear down borders, which is why I love Dirty Magazine. I love what, you know, Nate is doing out there, when you can just log on anytime and you'll see him in the streets, really doing the groundwork that no one wants to do, except people that have usually been through it. And I think for us, it's just really, you know, tearing down these borders, but staying true to the idea that we need to be safe, you know, so we have to be able to keep ourselves safe, and we got to look out for the safety of others. And that's where community starts. You know, it's just being able to have a conscience about the person next to you and the person that you're going to see and the people that you care about. And the minute that we start isolating is really when you start having, you know, the issues, when you're not talking to your friends who have a drug use issue or have a drug abuse issue. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people stigmatize the drugs they don't do. Okay, I smoke weed, but I'm not a cokehead.
Yeah.
Or I smoke weed, but I'm not an alcoholic. Or I drink, but I don't smoke weed. And, you know, so it becomes these things where we kind of like start setting up these barriers, and this like misinformation, communication is blocked. And I think for us, what we try to do is look at certain messaging and just kind of remix it sometimes, or, you know, constantly just take, hey, if Nate's doing something, I will repost Nate every day. You know, if I think that he's really addressing something, or if Dirty, I'm always, you know, trying to put people onto what I think is good information. And then, and then they can make their own determination from that, and then choose which ways they want to go about using, and I think for the fentanyl test kits, for us, we saw it as like a void where we could be able to help, where it's like immediately, a person that takes a test kit, they're dealing with their own self-determination and their own choice to test a drug. So some people are like, oh my God, you guys are saving lives. And I'm like, no, the people that are using the kits are saving their lives.
Right.
We're just providing the access. And then I think that using the kit also makes it somewhat like, okay, I'm being cognizant of what I'm doing. I'm taking this step process to make sure this drug is safe. This doesn't have this other drug in it, not to demonize fentanyl in itself. It obviously is effective for certain things.
Right.
And now I'm being mindful. Maybe that means I'm going to drink some water. Maybe it means I'm not going to mix this with something else because now I'm being mindful. And I think that's the whole idea of the cultural communication, is being mindful of yourself as an example, and then mindful of your community around you. And without that, we really can't have community, and we can't have understanding. And we
and Ripley, come back to you about that too, about being mindful of the community around you. So it's like, is it like a buddy system? I mean, one of the messages I've seen from somebody is don't use alone.
Yeah, you want to have someone that can administer Narcan, or be able to also just give you a check. Hey, maybe you're doing too much or something. But I think the buddy system is very good when you're dealing with, substance use. I mean, eating with someone also is very good, to be able to say, I'm not overeating.
Right.
But I think it's just being mindful of your own personal, determination, use, and then also being mindful of others, and just trying to increase that. So we try and just make it so that these kits are available as much as possible. And I think a big part has been bartenders and some places knowing that their staff is using. That's pretty obvious, that within the restaurants and within bars, there's substance use. They're a local drug dealer.
Why don't nighttime businesses want to admit that? What is it? What is the stigma about? Oh, I don't want to be thought of as
liability.
Is it just legal liability? I mean, that was a conversation we had a reporter ask Darryl and me. Is it just about legal liability? It's
liability. It's law enforcement. Actually, at the end of the day, I think everyone's scared. And then there's these stigmatizations of things and demonization, like we all heard about rainbow fentanyl pills and and it became.
It's pretty on the 6 o'clock news. A bag of colorful pills.
It was bullshit, and so I think at the end of the day, it's just really, how much truth can we impart to each other? Whether it's on a webinar, whether it's in a conversation, being honest about, to be able to tell someone else, hey, yeah, I use drugs. That's a huge step. I think just so they can maybe want to talk to you about it. Maybe they can actually come to you for some information. And I think that sometimes when we're dealing with these bars and restaurants, the fact that they already know substance use is going on, but they don't want to be liable. So certain spots are, oh, well, yeah, we don't kind of want that in here. We don't want that crowd in here. What is that crowd? People that are
right. Yeah, that crowd might look like me. That crowd might like.
What do you mean?
Yeah, and Ripley, there was something you wanted to add to that conversation about this kind of collective effort. This, I could see you wanted, when we were talking about the kind of, it goes back to your point about folks that are affected by this and are living in this world are the ones that need to be the biggest advocates for this, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, just like regarding the last thing that was said, I think it's exactly what Darryl's saying. It's like, well, first of all, like bars are safe consumption sites. Yeah. Like that's like, you're talking about a legalized drug substance that has a legal market. And when it was during Prohibition, like you actually did see people like dying from like really high rates of like alcohol poisoning because like the market itself and the way that it was being sold was not safe. And it is the criminalization of drugs that like make it unsafe. Nate can talk like more about this, but like I think ultimately like it's important to kind of like realize that like it may put you in a place of like liability. You will be dealing with law enforcement, but if you can be the like first line of defense in a public health initiative in this way, like you need to take that risk. And it is your responsibility as a business owner or someone who's in local government to be like pushing this forward, because as Nate said, like every overdose is a policy failure, and it is like the failure of people who are around who may have been able to prevent that if they had the access to these sorts of supplies. And it is the responsibility of local government to try to make them more accessible. And we're all at fault for not, like, whenever there is a young person or an older person or whoever who died of a fentanyl overdose or any sort of overdose, it was a preventable death.
Yeah.
So I think that like we should be thinking about it at like the way that we did about like every social justice movement that took risks when things were illegal. Like, you know, like do you want to be on the right side of history?
Right. Nate, talk to me about that too. So you're almost this renegade. Why are we just not stuck with, but why are we only have renegades moving this message out? Why, what do you see as being the blockade from getting more nighttime businesses, festivals, convenience stores, for God's sakes, getting out and getting a message out and getting in front of people like you are doing? You are taking a risk. Why are others not doing that?
I think people are afraid of the image that the public is going to see them in, and that they're afraid that they'll lose business or customers and things like that. And then again, liability. And then you bring in law enforcement and stuff like that. So they have all these risks in there, you know. And so there's got to be like this collective effort. And as much as I hate to say it, because I mean, you know, we've got to come together and find a middle ground some way, somehow, you know, because these policies and stuff like that, I mean, they're killing people, you know what I mean? Like some states, fentanyl test strips are illegal, you know what I mean? I still ship them out. Like, what, you know what I mean? Like, I don't care. What are they going to do about it? You know, but that's got to go. And I mean, we can even go outside of that. In Mexico, it's illegal to be in possession of naloxone. You know what I mean? It's illegal. It's a Schedule I substance over there. But I mean, you get what I'm saying? You know what I mean? So we've got to like have these conversations. And I mean, I know people that work with the DEA and stuff like that are in this space, and they have like, they don't agree on everything, but they have like done some stuff for them. Like before we had the infrared spectrometer, they would test the substance and get back to them. You know what I mean? But we've got to we got to stop making this shit political, man. Like, it's not political. It's about doing the right thing. Like, we know as a whole that the war on drugs, prohibition, iron law prohibition has absolutely been a catastrophic failure. And pushing forward with this is nothing but mere negligence. You know, and it's just ignorant. It's just plain ignorant. You know what I mean? And like, if you look throughout history, every time you challenge the drug supply, the drugs always come back with a vengeance. It happened with K2 and Tunchi. It happened with fentanyl. It happened during alcohol prohibition. You know, it always happens, and they've never stopped it. They've never eradicated any drug. You know what I mean? I would say drug users would be more successful at eradicating drugs, you know, than the law. You know what I mean?
I would say you're probably right. And I'm going to ask you a question here, Darryl, about this point of why there is not this consolidated effort, why we're not really kind of able to get our shit together, and why there isn't this, other than like your foundation and Nate and what Ripley's doing and what they're doing. There's a Project Opioid in Orlando. Some of those folks are on watching this today. What the Office of Nightlife in the New York City is doing to get Narcan behind every bar. There are spot check efforts. They seem to be coming from the grassroots effort or from government or nonprofit efforts, but there just isn't this groundswell. And it stuns me because what's the number I saw that during the last year of the pandemic, 100,000 people died of opioid overdose, but 10,000 people died from alcohol-related accidents. What? How much money are we spending there? How come we're not getting those same kind of resources? Is it political? Is it because if we're dealing with the marginalized communities, Darryl? What is it?
I mean, I think it's all of those in one. You know, everything is political when we come back down to it. It has to do with lobbying, has to do with, you know, who's making these laws. We all grew up under this kind of fake war on drugs, which was a war on us, which filled all of our jails, and we look at private jails and things like that. So we understand that there is like, you know, when we say the war on drugs was a failure, it was a failure for us, but it was successful for certain people. Successful for politicians, successful for certain people that wanted to pack jails or wanted to destroy communities outright. And I think that we have to acknowledge that. And then, I think overall is trying, I think experience is what kind of catalyzes us to take action, being in that world or having lost someone, and I think that I would assume everyone in this webinar has lost someone from an overdose. And that kind of propels you to see what you can do to get involved and what you could do to actually check yourself and then be able to also help others. But I just think there's just natural societal blockades that deal with government and deal with capitalism, which is really the reason why these things are, why we're not getting the information, why we grew up seeing this is your brain on drugs, and other, misinformative agendas and pitches. And, for us, it's really just about, there are tons of harm reduction programs. And I think that people should, always look to see what's available in their area. Congrats to Ariel. And, I appreciate her work here in New York and her and she and trying to at least get Narcan in each bar. Why isn't that immediate? Why is that? Why do we have to pass a bill for that?
Right.
And so those type of things are just societal political issues. And I think as right now, as when we see marijuana being made legal in most states, you see that the sheriffs, and law enforcement and precincts, and they need more money. They lost a whole bunch of their budget fighting marijuana. And now there's a new scare.
Yeah, we need a new boogeyman, don't we?
Well, it's a
Yeah.
boogeyman, but we've seen, I think there've probably been at least 6 or 8 cops that we've seen in press in the last year that have been caught distributing fentanyl in large amounts. And, in Carl's book, one of his books, I think it's High Price, he mentions that, or maybe it's maybe the second one, but kind of mentions that when you hear the word epidemic, that means there's a law enforcement protocol ready to lock us up. Users of any color, people probably of complexion, and Black, brown people, but also people that may not be playing their role in society and an established aspect. And once we hear that, then we know that something else is coming behind it. And so right now, when we're seeing this, fentanyl, stigma, it's a demon, it's a devil. That's not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to be able to say, hey, can you make sure and just check this drug to make sure this drug is not in there?
Right.
And help yourself.
And just to clarify too, again, for some folks that may not be aware of the process of like even fentanyl testing, drug testing kits, how that works, how? Somebody tell me how that works. I think I've just picked up a bag of something, and what do I do if I'm going to use it?
We actually use some really provocative, just says fentanyl testing strip, like very big on it, which blocks us from certain bars or restaurants, but we wanted it to be something that kind of stood out.
Okay.
That people want to know exactly what it is, get the conversation going, and then be able to adjust it later. And we give it out for free. And that's another thing, is that, hey, this is free, it has access. Narcan is not always free. Thank God for Nate and other people that are actually out here giving it out to people.
Right.
And I think that's, so you can just take this test strip. We give you water, we give you a tin, we give you a very simple graphic card. I saw some of the verbiage. We saw a lot of the verbiage was like, it's like reading a little mini book before you actually did the test.
Right.
People don't want to read a book, they want to actually get high. And so you just want to be able to, kind of give them the big safety points and then be able to go from there.
Okay. Okay. So if there were, I want to ask each of you the same question. If there is one thing you could persuade upon a business owner, a nightclub owner, a festival producer, just do this one damn thing. And what's that going to be? Ripley, what's that going to be? If you could persuade a producer of an event, a nighttime event, where that there are going to be customers of theirs that are going to be users, what would you want them to do?
Yeah, I mean, if it's not just like at the very bare minimum, it's like having something like what ASAP Foundation does on site. A step up from that is like hiring a young person who is a drug user or is in the scene, who like people respect, to like kind of be facilitating and looking out for people, who like has some basic medical training to like you know, to address like a situation. And yeah, I see in the question, there's also a question about like the Narcan behind every bar. Obviously that like is amazing. Like every single place that has drinking, let alone just like any sort of like cultural event, should have Narcan and fentanyl test strips. But in terms of adopting like greater measures for drugs other than opioids, I mean, I have been saying this for a while. I don't know if like people are ready for that conversation, and it's really upsetting like that. You know, if you you know, I was a methamphetamine user. I was going on hookup apps and like buying Tina and like hooking up with people and trading sex for drugs. And like that's something that like a lot of people who are like out here in the club world are also doing. So trying to also you know, serve the stimulant user community, I think is super important.
Okay, Nate, if you could get in front, what would you tell a nighttime business? Well, you're already doing it probably. What's the most important thing?
I mean, say if they didn't want to put any Narcan or test strips in the bar, I would ask them I would ask them to be honest with themselves about the people that are coming into their establishment. Like if you're in the industry, you know damn well that people are using drugs in your establishment. And it's like, how much do you really care about your patrons and your employees? Because if you've been in the industry, like, you know, it's going on. We all do. You know what I mean? And so I would tell them to like push their pride or their ego to the side and do the right thing. Like, forget about the like, here's the thing about harm reduction. Like, I don't ask for permission. I just do shit. I just do the right damn thing. I don't care about permission. I don't care about any of that. Like, I mean, you know, it's just about saving lives. Like, I'm going to do whatever I got to do to save people's lives at the end of the day. Like, I don't need a permission slip to do that.
Right.
And I've never asked for one.
Right. I'll never ask you for one either. Darryl, what do you think? What is it? Is it more foundations like yours? Is it a consolidated national effort? What's it going to take to get into the heads of these people?
I think it's just individual accountability. But at the end of the day, like Nate just said, you want to be able to say, can you just do the right thing? Right. We all know what the right thing is trying to help other people be safe. You know, we go into, so if for a night, I think it's sometimes different for festivals and bars and restaurants, but you want to make sure that your staff knows CPR. You want to make sure that everybody there does a naloxone or Narcan training session, you know, and I think, you know, you have to be real from otherwise. Hey, I want to keep safety tools here for my patrons who actually pay me, keep me alive, allow me to pay my bills. I want them to be able to do the same and continue to live life. So I think it's just do the right thing, make sure that you have the tools to be able to keep people safe and save one. We go to a restaurant, it shows you how to stop somebody from choking.
Hello.
Hey, you know, hey, go to a restaurant, let's have a poster that says this is how you administer, you know, Narcan to somebody that's overdosing. It's happened. I know there's one spot in New York that specifically where it's like, okay, cool. They didn't want it's not they didn't want the test strips, but they're, you know, leery about it at first. They're partners. So I can't say that the person who I was speaking to didn't have this end all be all, but then, you know, they had 2 overdoses in their space. You know, I don't believe anyone died, but at the end of the day, they now immediately, oh, hey, Darryl, can we get some of those test kits in here? Can we get, do you have Narcan? And a lot of it was, you know, they knew, you know, one of the other owners or managers was telling me, oh, we don't really have that type of crowd. I'm like, what do you mean have that crowd? I'm in here.
Yeah, what the hell does that mean?
What does a drug user look like?
Yeah, exactly. And there are other people in here, so maybe you're just blinding yourself, and and it's a pride thing, I guess, like Nate said. But it's just do the right thing, and please make your place a safe consumption site. You're already selling alcohol. Alcohol is probably the most common denominator in almost all overdoses. Very, I would say it's probably in about 60%, 40% of toxicology reports, that are dealing with overdose. So, I actually saw on the street these group of guys, and they were probably using looked unhoused at, as far as like the way they were set in the park. One guy you saw was going overdose, but they immediately reacted, and they had Narcan, and they started hitting him up. They got water, and they were immediately acting like an EMT squad. you know, and the fact that you can be in an establishment that doesn't know how to do that, that
Right.
is alcohol or serving drugs, is kind of crazy.
It is kind of crazy. There's a third question that just came in from someone who's working in Miami-Dade County about the Project Opioid, which they just made some announcements this last week of working in the state there, also in Orlando, and they're getting ready for the Ultra Festival. And they were wondering, you said, you're outside the festival, but do not have contact with anybody inside the festival. How do we tap into the festival world? And Darryl, you got your hand up. I'm going to say this, but I'm also want to mention Dance Safe as a national nonprofit organization. It pops up tents at festivals. They were on one of my podcasts earlier. They kick ass. That organization's got the message, and they've already got the relationship with a lot of the festivals. And you probably could, Google Dance Safe and tap right into them. They'd be a resource. What have you got, Darryl? Somebody wants to get inside the gate at the festival.
Oh, well, I think Nate could best answer this, but I'll give an example. Before we had, here in New York, there was like Randall's Island. People take shuttles from the train there.
Yep.
So what we did is we set up a tent outside of the train station, just try to catch people going in and coming out of the festival, to be able to give them whatever it is that we can do. It's like, you might not be able to take this in there, but you should. Now you can probably take Narcan into almost any festival, which is great. 3 years ago, it wasn't the same situation.
Right. Nate?
Yeah. So it's pretty hard unless like you're well established and known to get into a festival at that capacity. I mean, I've emailed places before and they never got back to me, or messaged them on Instagram. It could be they're busy or whatever, various variables and whatnot. But like Darryl said, get creative. If you really want to do it and you have access to the resources, get creative. You know what I mean? Set up. If a lot of times people walk over, you know what I mean? Set up a table. You're in a public space, set up a table, get creative, do some art, put going to Ultra Fest or need Narcan or free test, you know what I mean? Get creative, do a little graffiti thing, like whatever your thing is. When I was at the University of Oregon, it was raining one day, right? And we were giving out Narcan at the street fair, and I was like, okay, and this particular day, not a lot of people were coming because it was raining and stuff like that. So I was like, well, I need to get creative. And one of the guys down the street was like an artist. He did graffiti and things like that. I was like, hey, can you do me a little thing on this cardboard so I can try to draw some attention? And I put SCO ducks on it, which is like what they say during games and stuff like that. And immediately it drew in more attention and things like that. And so, yeah, you just have to get creative. Like you have to look at, like, maybe go on the site and look at usually when you get festivals, it has like different maps and entry points to the festival and things like that. And you have to pinpoint a spot to where you can set up where you'll catch the crowd coming in. You can give it out that way. So if they won't allow you in, you just got to work around it and be creative.
I'm devious as well. For our friends in Florida, I always like to scan who are the sponsors, who are the donors, who are the underwriters of an event, and work the door that way. They do not want the bad exposure. They want to be seen. And I have worked the hell out of social media on some folks just to get my big old size 14 foot in the door. So I would certainly work at some of those sponsors of those events. They don't want the bad press, and they've got the leverage there with the festival producers. That's my sense. All right, our time is almost up. I got to tell you, you are my people, and thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you, Darryl, for setting this up. This is the start of a conversation. My 24-hour nation's hope is that every nighttime business operator will voluntarily take on risk reduction and be prepared, period. Bars, restaurants, clubs, convenience stores, festivals. Anyone who wants to get high does not deserve to die, period. By the time this YouTube video goes up, I'll also have some resources available of some of these other things I've talked about, Project Opioid, any other information that you all rip. Darryl, Nathan, if you want me to share your social media handles or stuff, just give me a shout, let me know. I'll put those out there too, because Darryl's point about resharing Nathan's stuff is one way to get out in front of people too and to communicate this message. I'll be happy to do that. Things are changing every day. Yesterday, one naloxone producer said they want to make it be available to anybody in the country without prescription. Those of you who are not in the nighttime industry per se, but are parents, risk reduction counselors, customers, no one can make change happen more than an impassioned guardian of lives. Just ask Tatiana when she gets out of her flu. And you can press the issue of risk reduction better than anybody else at your own favorite nighttime establishment just by going in and saying, I'd like a scotch and soda. And oh, by the way, do you have Narcan behind the bar? My name is Randall White. Next month, January 23rd on Monday, we host an online panel with urban planners, a journalist, a renowned architect and designer, all women, ethnically diverse, to discuss what I refer to as the patriarchy of design, how streets, transportation, building, sidewalks, lighting, public spaces, and their landscaping all seem to be envisioned lovely by men and for the daytime, but not accommodating the night, and certainly not as welcoming for women. Again, thank you, Ripley, Nathan, Darryl. I so appreciative of you. Follow us at 24hournation.com online and on social media at 24 Hour Nation. My name is Randall White. Celebrate the holidays with good care and take care of each other. Okay.
Thank you for having us.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right.